Ken Otto is my name. It was the first adventure was with HTPs that I did. I started in 1976 with Omuguri. They needed a farmer mechanic there. Omuguri was such an unusual place. I never lived on a tidal river where the water comes in and out twice a day. It's like the river just emptied. You pull like pulling a plug out of a sink, and you could nearly walk across if you could walk, because the mud came above your knees when you stepped in. So all of our groceries and our fuel and had to come up the tidal river. And we had a barge that came up with containers of food and drums of fuel. Any tractor, machinery, Jeep came on the barge. One time we were donated some bulls. We were going to have better beef. So they came. I was the farmer and I had to go in and bring the bulls out. But the story that stands out most vividly is I was there about 6 months. So it would have been during '76 when we got a telephone. And that was a big event. Previous to that, we only had a ham radio that we could send messages twice a day to other staff that were in the nearest white township of Wyndham. And Wyndham was kind of, most people thought Wyndham was at the end of the world, and we were at the 40 miles beyond the end of the world. We got this radio telephone, and this big antenna was on a 30-foot tower, and the reception was incredibly clear. I could call my parents in Michigan from Outback Australia. It was, we could hardly believe it, how clear it was. So, it was during the wet. Now the wet happens from, there's 30 inches of rain that falls from like the middle of December to the middle of March. And we were keeping, we were trying to keep everything mowed with a mower on the tractor. And with so much rain that the grass would just jump up real fast and quick. Well, the way you manage horses during the wet was to just let them go and run free, because they could find water and food by themselves, and you just captured them in March when you would start what's called mustering the cattle. That's an Australian word, muster. And so one night, because the grass was so nice and fresh, the horses would like it. So one night, this was 9 or 10 o'clock at night, a horse was grazing, and one thing that the Aboriginals have is dogs. Like each family grouping, and there's three or four generations at each camp, they would have 8 or 10 dogs, because they take care of you, they protect you, and all those good things. Well, this horse got too close to one of the camps, and the dogs explode, and the horse takes off running, and it was so dark the horse didn't see what it was doing. So the horse ran into one of the guy wires that hold the telephone. It was a small tower with 3 guy wires, and down came the telephone. No, so it was, I asked myself, where else can a horse and a dog ruin your phone system? But that's what happened. We did get it repaired later, but those things, there were some situations there that you could see a little bit of possibility for change, but there were other situations where you knew nothing was going to change. One night, the barge. Now the barge is what? 30 feet long. It might have been 15 feet wide. It was pretty wide. It might have been 40 feet long too, actually, now that I think about it. Anyway, it was a good size. And I think we had some food containers, and I'm not sure what else on it. And the typical pattern is you leave during the afternoon after you've loaded it, and sometimes we hired someone with a crane to help load the barge. So that was good. And then you would drive the barge out to the opening of the river and wait for the tide to go in. So you have to know when the tide's going in. So you got these book of tide tables, and sometimes it's 1 o'clock that you start, sometimes it's 3 a.m. that you start the run in the river. And so we always, the white people the Aboriginal called us Guttia, because that was their name that was a language name for white people. And we, all of us, there was about 10 of us who worked with a team of, like, one of us worked on the garden, one of us worked in the shop, one of us worked in the store, the health clinic, the school. Anyway, there was a barge crew. But because there was readily available alcohol in Wyndham, the barge crew was not always sober. Alcohol was a big problem in Omuleri. And so there's the barge captain, who's this kind of middle-aged elder, and then the white staff was the engineer that ran the barge. And anyway, what happened was as we were coming up to, we often pull up, everybody can get off, and then Peter's the engineer, would go out in the middle of the river and anchor it, so that the next day we could unload it, because you'd get there at in the middle of the night. Well, we get off and we start to tie the rope around the tree to hold the barge, and the barge just keeps right on going down the river with the tide, because the captain, Eddie, did not make sure the rope was tied. And they had already ran off to be with their families or whatever. So Peter and I were left to somehow get the barge. This is not a light barge, this is heavy. And get a rope on it and tie it somewhere close to the jetty so that we could unload it the next day. So it was much easier. Peter took all his clothes off and went after the barge, so I did the same thing. And then I had one rope at the tree, and he had another rope at the barge, and we were trying to get it close enough to tie it together. And we had one flashlight, and until I think I dropped it, but anyway, it went into the water, and it still stayed on. It still stayed on for quite a while before it went out. And that was the funny part, was that the flashlight still stayed on when it was in the water. But those were the kind of things that we had to, we had to be a good example of the things were possible to do for the people who wanted to reestablish on their ancestral land. But they just lost the vision so easily of something good and better, and instead of being kind of a drunken bum. And so that's what we had to deal with. So anyway, I just remember that night where we got naked and tried to get the two ropes together. So the third story is how, you see, Aboriginals are, and white people don't understand this, they can make a story up about anything. And so they'll look at a landscape, and if they see something on the landscape that reminds them of an animal, like a frog, or an alligator, or a crocodile, or another one of the birds that live there, they make up a story about it. So the story of how the Forest River was made was two birds. One was a jabiru, which is very similar to a flamingo, real tall. And then there was another bird, I don't know the name of it, I'm sorry. It would be like the size of a crow or something like that. Anyway, so the jabiru is hunting one day, and he comes across the crow, and he says, well, this looks kind of in a good place. I'd like to live here. And this all happened during what the Aboriginals call the dream time, which is a time when everything was created. And so this is a time when people interacted with what you'd call mythological beings. I mean, that did magical kind of things. And so the dream time started, and then somebody declared the dream time over. So the bird says, well, sure, you can live here, but all the fish in this pond are mine. I don't, that's one of the rules you got to live with. Well, you can tell that's set things up for a possible fight. So the bird comes back from a hunting trip, the small crow. I wish I had the right name of it, because it's not a crow. And of course the jabiru is cooking some fish on a fire, and so they get in a fight. And their fighting creates the Forest River. They push up the rocks. If you ever saw the Crocodile Dundee movie and you see those escarpments on cliffs and stuff, that's what this looked like. That the river went right through these stones. Well, at the end of the fight, the jabiru gets a stick out of the fire and hits the smaller bird. And that's why there's red feathers here. There's an explanation on why birds get red feathers. And anyway, I just think that white people just don't understand the creativity that goes into these stories. And the world's going to lose a lot of good stuff if these people don't make it. And so I'm worried about some of the peoples that go out of being. And so that's one of the reasons that we were there, trying to give them strength to manage their own affairs and not let so many external forces like a diamond, they wanted to look for diamonds in the land because there's indications of that, and And they were just taken advantage of and cheated so much. So anyway, that's the story of how the Forest River was made. And it's a tidal river, water in and out twice a day. The tidal influence goes about a mile past the community. And then during the dry period, it turns into a series of pools. And one of them is where we got our water. But it was 6 miles away. So it took 45 minutes to get the 6 miles because the roads are so bad. I mean, it's just rocks. And there was hardly anything else to do about that. So the story of how the Forest River got created, that's the story.